We know that truly helpful service, people you can depend on, and sound financial advice isn't easy to come by. But at Envision Bank, you can rely on us. Rely on us to be there when you need us most, to help guide your financial future. And while we often think we're at the end of something, we're at the beginning of something else. Rely on us for a better tomorrow. Together, a brighter future is in sight. Envision Bank. See the difference.
Welcome everyone from wherever you're logging on. I'm Shirley Liang and I'm a columnist at the Boston Globe. This is the first in a series of conversations sponsored by Envision Bank. Today's session examines how the events of 2020, from the killing of George Floyd to Black Lives Matter protests, have compelled companies to re-examine what it means to be an inclusive organization, from holding courageous conversations to setting new goals with diversity in mind. If you have no idea what I mean by courageous conversations, you're going to learn a lot about them today. We're going to hear perspectives from three experts across three different sectors: diversity consultant Jackie Glenn, who was the former Global Chief Diversity Officer at EMC, Kent Kunkel, the General Manager of Turner Construction, and Ian Esteban, the Chief of Staff at Sarepta Therapeutics. This will be a conversation about what is and isn't working when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and what more companies are doing in this moment of racial reckoning. Whether you're at a big company or a small one, I hope all of you will walk away from today's session with best practices you can bring to your organization. But before we begin, we're going to hear some remarks from our sponsor. Here is Bill Parent, the CEO of Envision Bank.
Thank you, Shirley. On behalf of all my colleagues at Envision Bank, it is an honor to be part of this important discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing our panelists' thoughts on how companies, including ours, need to evolve our diversity and inclusion strategies to better respond and participate in what's happening in our communities today. This topic is important to me personally and as a company leader, because I've seen what can happen when a company's culture allows its colleagues to bring their true, authentic, and whole selves into work every day. I joined Envision Bank on April 1st of this year. That was 19 days after the shooting of Breonna Taylor and 55 days before the death of George Floyd. As I reflect on that time, I realize that is when we as a country reached a tipping point in the need to have courageous conversations. This work isn't easy. And it's not just about the conversations. It's about actions and choices across a myriad of areas that we only will scratch the surface of today. These issues are ones that I'm learning more about every day as a person and as a leader, which is one of the reasons today's panel was so important for us at Envision Bank to be part of, because it's another chance to expand the dialogue. Knowing the importance of having many voices at the table, one of the first things I did at Envision was form a diversity council comprised of talented individuals from different life journeys and at every level in the company to work with me in guiding our company. It's my hope that together we will embrace the uncomfortable and seek to create new understandings by recognizing the humanity of each individual and finding common ground together. Through this, we will build meaningful goals that will have impact and go beyond, I hope, the traditional diversity goals. Thank you to our panelists for being here today and helping us all learn what else we can do to create a more diverse and inclusive work culture where everyone is willing to have these courageous conversations.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for your sponsorship. So we're going to do things a little bit differently today. During the first half, I'm going to talk to Jackie, Kent, and Ian each separately. And then, because each has a unique story to tell, and then everyone will come together in the second half of the panel to answer a few more questions from me and questions from the audience. We've received some great pre-submitted questions, and if anyone in the audience now wants to ask a question during the panel, please use your Q&A function during the Zoom. The chat function has been turned off. So first up is going to be Jackie Glenn. Jackie, you want to turn on your camera? Hi,
Hello.
Jackie. So Jackie is the founder and CEO of Glenn Diversity Inclusion and HR Solutions. She began her career at EMC, where she rose to become the Global Chief Diversity Officer for a workforce of 60,000 employees. Good to see you again,
Good
Jackie.
to see you too.
So in the world of diversity consulting, there seems to be a before and after George Floyd. How has Floyd changed the way you advise your clients on diversity and inclusion?
Well, Shirley, let me start out by thanking you for being here today, for having me here today on this special day. I think there's several changes that have occurred since the killing of George Floyd. And I think the before and after is stark. I think there was a lot of talking and a little bit of doing before George Floyd. I think there was a lot of companies that had great intention, but was just, if I might say, just going through the motion. As I said, their talk-do ratio was not equal. I think now that we found ourselves where we were all home because of COVID, and a lot of us had a chance. I don't think there's anyone that have not seen that 9+ minute video of George Floyd neck being knelt on. I think now companies are stepping back and taking a look at what they had in place and really re-examining their intentions, but also if they had a strategy, was it meaty enough? Is this strategy working? Was it just a check the box? And there being more, as I like to say, deliberate and intention, and they're being transparent, knowing that a lot of them know that they're not doing as much or they need to do more. So I think a lot more self-awareness, and as a company, really taking a stock and examining what are we doing, is it working, and why are we doing what we're doing, and really embarking on not just your everyday run-of-the-mill diversity training. Because I get called, Shirley, all the time, can I have unconscious bias? Can I have We need to have courageous conversation. And everyone that I work with, some people take it really well and agree, but courageous conversation with a focus on race relation and racial inequity. I think that's where a lot of companies are starting from. That's what they're embracing, and understanding that there's several dimensions to diversity, Shirley, but to start at the race piece. And people always ask me, why start there? It's so uncomfortable. Because it is. And because it's so uncomfortable, if you can start there and get it right, you're on your way.
So, Jackie, let's talk a little bit more about courageous conversations. Bill had mentioned this in his remarks as well. How do you define it? How is that different from all the other diversity training that has come before?
For me, courageous conversation, I titled it Courageous Conversation. There are different versions of courageous conversation, depending on which diversity consultant you talk to. We all have it differently. But my subtitle, Shirley, is the depolarization of the workforce, because I feel like we're all polarized. In courageous conversation, we are really focusing more on why it's important to not be silent. So with a grounding in race relations, in systematic racism, is our racism, overt and covert racism, and how it shows up in the workplace, in things like bootstrapping, in things like hiring discrimination, in things like there's a myriad of things that it comes up in, and these are things that normally we shy away from talking about. The white allied and self-appointed allies, and how people gaslighting. We talk about things like tone policing, and those are things that are normally not spoken about, or they're glossed over. So having these courageous conversations is really pointedly speaking to things that are normally not spoken about in corporation because they're too uncomfortable.
And so can any company just launch into a courageous conversations, or do you have to be ready for it?
I don't think they can launch into one if they don't have someone with the expertise of doing this. And I'm smiling because, who is ever ready to be uncomfortable? No one is. But I think, as I like to tell my clients, strap yourself in because you're entering to a courageous conversation. Nobody's is ever completely ready, but I think people are open and they're receptive to it. And even if they're uncomfortable in the courageous conversation dialogue, they sit in their discomfort.
Mhm. So we had so many great questions from the audience, and I wanted to kind of get to as many as possible. And so I'm going to throw you a question that actually got pre-submitted. So how would you describe an inclusive leader? What are the behaviors that leaders most need to demonstrate to be seen as an inclusive leader?
I think an inclusive leader is a leader who listens, who listens to all and every opinion that comes his way, listens. Inclusive leader is someone who can spot someone on their team who might be suffering from imposter syndrome. An inclusive leader is one who's self-aware and who is open to sort of be that servant leader that knows their organization and is willing to not just manage up, Shirley, but to manage in the middle and also to manage down. Someone who can sort of work their way throughout from the top of the C-suite all the way down to the individual contributor, and is open to walk the hallways or walk into Zoom land and really be able to listen to the brand new, just graduated from college hire to the seasoned professional in the C-suite, someone who's open, who is flexible, who is fluid, and who is open to all and every ideas. I think that's an inclusive leader, and who admit when they don't know and is open and willing to learn.
Right. Well, thank you, Jackie, for your insights. We are going to see you again in the second half. I'm going to now welcome Kent Kunkel to our Zoom panel. Hi, Kent.
Hey, how you doing, Shirley?
Good to see you. So Kent is the general manager of Turner Construction in Boston. So if you see a new building in the Seaport, chances are Turner built it. Turner is one of the country's biggest construction management companies and has 450 employees in the Boston area. So I want you to take us back to the last week of May. The George Floyd video has gone viral. Protests have erupted around the country. So what was happening inside Turner Construction? I mean, how did management address the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yes. So I remember how this event affected our staff more than I'd ever seen, specifically our people of color. It became very clear very early that people were like profoundly hurt. And we dove in and we just, fortunately, we had an employee resource group, which was for our people of color. And I had already built a relationship with this group. And I just started to engage in some conversations about what's going on. How do you feel? What do you think the company should be doing in this moment? And that advisement from them and hearing the pain, when you hear the pain from people that you work with every day, talk about how systemic racism still exists in their lives, you start to realize I must take some type of action. And we sent out a letter to every employee that called it what it was, the murder of George Floyd. And we were very much coached, like, don't sidestep this. And, you must address this head on. And said that we are now an anti-racist company. We're not just going to get away with saying, well, we don't have racist acts. We're going to become an anti-racist company.
Did you actually use that language, anti-racist?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And, but here's the thing. We knew that we were about to lead something that we yet had a ton to learn. So congratulations. You need to go lead and be the leader that they expect you to be every day of the week, where you are on trying to figure this out yourself. So we all went off to try to get as smart, however you could, as possible. One of the things we did, and I'm very much aware of, you don't want to turn to people of color and say, you need to lead this for our business unit. Mm-hmm. That doesn't work, but it doesn't mean that they can't share their stories and their thoughts and help educate others. And we had what we called real talks. And we started to bring in groups of leaders to listen to some brave people of color who shared some of the stories that they did. We then said, wait, don't forget that white people are kind of confused about what's going on here. So we had what we called peer talks. We named, came up all these names. And we got groups of white people to say, you're getting a lot thrown at you yourself right now. How are you handling this? What is coming easy? What are you struggling with? What else do you need? And again and again, it was, I just want more training. I want to understand this better. We are part of the Boston office is one of 40 offices. We are part of a big organization that was able to distribute quickly training, and we got mandatory training. We, any given year we have maybe 2-3 mandatory trainings. The company quickly threw up 4 mandatory trainings that everyone is to take in August, September, October, November, and they're on history of systemic racism, white privilege, building a culture of empathy, anti-racism culture. And we started giving everybody that information. And then, as Jackie talked about, we opened up the forum for people to have courageous conversations. So after the training was over, you could sign up and jump into a Zoom call room. And we had about 30 people each time with a facilitator. And you just talked about what you just learned. And, you set the stage. Everybody's got to understand this is a safe place. And then it gets out there. And hearing from your own coworkers talking about this, and hearing from the white people on what they're struggling with, and their perspectives. It's never been more comfortable to talk about the color somebody is, or their race, and just talk about it and how they're affected. And I got to say that's something that felt like before this we sort of sidestepped. It was one of those HR things a little bit like, well, isn't that like voodoo? Like, aren't you supposed to stay away from talking about race? Like, isn't that a quick way to go to HR and find yourself exiting? But now it's more open to talk about it so we can learn from each other.
Yeah, I've heard Jackie talk about that too, about how many companies had diversity inclusion programs, but they avoided race. And if you think about it now, you're like, how could you avoid race if this is right? If you're going to improve, make a more inclusive program. So one of the things I was hoping you would share with the audience is when you and I first talked, you shared a story about a racist incident in September and how the company handled it. Can you share that with us right now?
Sure. So one of our major projects one day had inside of one of the outhouses, we'll call them, someone put a swastika and wrote F Black Lives Matter. And we found out about 11 o'clock in the morning. So I get a phone call immediately, and this has happened. And I would say that in the past, we might have said, go clean that thing off, get the foreman together and tell them, hey, this is no good. And some version of that, you would have addressed it, but at a certain level. So what we did in this situation is, again, we got all of the workers together on the site. We let them know what we had found, and we told everybody the day is done. Everyone go home. And so we sent, many workers home for the day. Major project. We'll just leave it at that. And the next day, everybody came into work, and for the first 45 minutes, it was, I looked at the day and I thought it was some version of a terrible day. It actually became like the best day, because we actually stood up and addressed this head on. We stood there with the owner, with the unions, with the subcontractors, and we delivered a message to all the workers that there is zero tolerance for this. And you know what? The reality is 99.9% of them were with us already. They are not people that didn't agree, but there was somebody that came in, denigrated our workplace, and thought that it's okay to put a symbol like that up. And the message from the unions themselves couldn't have been more powerful. To be told that you'll be out. I mean, you can make a pretty good living in Boston area in the unions, and it's a great career. You're going to be out. You're not going to come back in. Good luck going trying to find something else to do that you can have that type of living. And we then, after that, we brought everybody in for 2.5 hours of training on systemic racism in America. So, we figured out how to do all this social distancing, created many, many different locations. and went through all of that training. Just so, if you hadn't heard it before, you're hearing it now.
Mhm.
So I went home that night, and I remember my 3 kids were like, "How was work?" And I was like, "I think it was my best day ever."
Mm. Ken, I love that story that you share about taking your worst day and making it the best day, right? Through all that training and through all that education. So Ken, thank you for sharing your insights. We're going to see you in the second half. I'm going to welcome our third panelist, Ian Estepan. Ian, bye Kent. Where's Ian? Was Ian good?
Here
Oh,
we
here
go.
he is.
We're here.
Hi, Ian.
Hey, how are you?
So Ian is Sarepta's chief of staff. He's responsible for both project management and corporate affairs at the Cambridge Biotech Company. He shapes the company's strategy and messaging. So I want to ask you the same question I just asked Kent, which was about taking us back to the last week of May. The Floyd video has gone viral. There are protests around the country. What was Sarepta's response to what was going on?
It was a pivotal moment. I mean, I would want to take first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this. It was a really pivotal moment, but I do want to acknowledge that November 22nd was actually the 6-year anniversary of Tamir Rice being shot and killed. And I'll say, obviously, these are all horrific, but to see a 12-year-old gunned down with absolutely no warning is an image that will never, I can never shake. It was just an unbelievable moment. So this has been going on well before George Floyd and all the others that have been happening recently. But, to your very good point, George Floyd was a pivotal moment. And I like how generations often like to make fun of each other, and especially the older generations like to make fun of younger generations. But, at that moment, the younger generation within Sarepta, really stepped up and said, what is the company's position on this? We talk about our values as an organization, but we're looking for leadership, not just within our organization, but within society. And so it is important for the place that we work, that we know our values are aligned, not just with the organization. And so I was readily admit, this was not something that I was necessarily prepared to respond to, nor was our CEO, Doug Ingram, really ready to respond to. But it was clear that we needed to respond. And he wrote a really heartfelt letter on his position and the company's position. And one of the employees asked me to maybe write a blog also, and I did. And the story that I wrote about was an experience that I had back in college. So I attended Columbia University. And if you don't know, Columbia is in the middle of New York City on 116th Street. And my parents had just bought me a new car. And so I was actually driving that new car home. My best friend and I, we were in the car, and we went up just literally 9 blocks to 125th Street. And I'm making a left-hand turn on 125th Street, and I get pulled over. And I get pulled over, and I'm used to getting pulled over. I think at one point I had been pulled over 6 times in 1 month. So that wasn't a surprise, but what happened here was actually very different. I got pulled over and I got surrounded by 8 different police cars. And when they came out, they all had their guns drawn. And so, the one police officer came up and asked me, he said, "This doesn't look like it's going to be a good day for you," with his gun drawn. And I was maybe 20 at the time, right? So more than 20 years ago. And I was fairly cocky, and I said, "I don't think so. What's the issue?" And I will readily admit that it's not the right approach for anyone listening. And he said, this car is obviously stolen. We ran your plates, and the car is showing up as a different car. So you got problems. So get out of the car. And so right then I actually relaxed. Surprisingly, I relaxed because I knew, look, this is a misunderstanding. This is going to be resolved. And lo and behold, long story short, it was. And so obviously, I was going home, and I was driving, but of course I was really frustrated. I was frustrated with being pulled over because why did you run my plates? Right? I mean, yes, it turned out like I understand why it looked like, this car could be potentially stolen, but why did you run my plates in the first place? Right? And so I went home, and to tell my mother the story of how, the cops, drew their guns on us, and I was just more frustrated, and she was horrified when she heard the story, and I didn't quite get it, right? Because I was just focused on being marginalized, but she was thinking about me being killed, right? And now, as we see this, and not that this didn't happen previously, it's probably happened more frequently than it even does now. It's now that we just happen to see it more often. I realized why she was so horrified was that I just happened to be incredibly lucky on that day, and so I actually have to give credit to the police officer, for actually not pulling the trigger, for actually giving me the time to show that I didn't steal this car, even though they assumed that I did, and that it didn't escalate into something far greater. And so I wrote that blog, and I got overwhelming support within this. I wrote this blog on our internet, and I got overwhelming support from it. But one colleague actually reached out to me. He was a Black colleague, and the beginning of his email said, you're an executive committee member, so I'm not sure if it's appropriate for me to reach out to you. The rest of the sentence was, but I shared similar experiences to you. But I stopped dead in my track when he said that, because it was a clear realization that we as an organization were doing something wrong. The fact that one of my colleagues, because I happened to be on the executive team, wasn't comfortable reaching out to me. And this is something that our ecom, and our CEO talks about constantly, which is we want there to be, good communication within our organization. In order for any organization to be successful, communication is key, especially as you're growing. And so, we realized that we were doing something wrong. We were telling people, come talk to us, but we weren't being proactive about it, right? And so, and a couple of other executive committee members had a similar experience. And so what we did was institute, we call them coffee chats, where every month, every single executive committee member has an open time for employees to come and talk to us, right? Because it's clearly not enough to say, yes, come talk to us. You actually have to be intentional. You have to actually be proactive, because despite what you say, people still have reservations, and there's still this element of hierarchy within an organization. And my philosophy certainly is that there should be absolutely no hierarchy in any organization, because every single job is important. If it isn't, then you don't need that job, right? And so therefore, everyone should be talking to each other. There should be a free flow of communication. Now, at the same time, we added to Kent's good point, we added a multicultural employee resource group also. But the mission and the focus of this group was really to celebrate diversity within the organization. And the George Floyd incident, though, kind of changed their focus, where it became more concrete, where it wasn't just necessarily celebrating diversity, but it was actually now morphed into, how do we ensure that our workforce becomes more diverse? So how are we hiring? How are we going and looking for more talent that is diverse? Then once people are in the organization, what are we doing to actually support those people so that they are successful and they are integrated and they are able to actually flourish in the environment? And then from our business perspective, so we produce drugs for Duchenne muscular dystrophy and other rare diseases. And how do we ensure that there's a diverse patient population who's actually going to be able to get access to both our clinical studies, and when our drugs are actually commercialized, how they'd be able to get access to those therapies? And so there was a really pivotal moment in the shift in our employee resource group. And the other thing we realized is that in order to make our employee resources groups effective, they have to be well integrated into the organization. It can't be a separate initiative. They have to be embedded, because these are core priorities, for the organization. And we also realize, look, we can set our values as an executive team, but there also has to be an adoption of those values from the employees to actually make the culture real. right? And so figuring out a way to actually embed empower and embed the employee resource groups into the organization in a way that you can impact, our hiring. So obviously close coordination with HR, actually impact, how we do outreach for patients for clinical studies, and a real effort around how we try to find underserved patients who may not have access to healthcare, to ensure that they're getting the best treatments for drugs that are now approved for a devastating disease. So that this was all sparked by George Floyd, and it's been an absolute amazing moment that strengthened certainly the culture at Sarepta.
Ian, I want to get to the second half, but can you spend 1 minute talking about a little bit more about what I loved? We first started chatting for the Top Places to Work issue. Sarepta was on the list. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But one of the things that struck me was that, again, you looked at diversity in your business function externally. And so tell the story of how, the Duchenne, the clinical trials, a lot of clinical trials are mostly white patients, and how COVID is kind of giving you lessons to how to make these clinical trials more equitable. And so can you spend 1 minute talking about—
I'm going to struggle with 1 minute, I think, as you can see, but I'll try to make it pithy, which is, it's exactly right. I mean, COVID, it's been an absolute devastation as we passed 200,000 people contracting the disease yesterday, and then obviously 100,000 people being hospitalized yesterday. It's just absolutely devastating. But in any situation, you try to find silver linings, and one of the silver linings for COVID has been our reliance, as we're on a Zoom call right now, as you see, is that technology enables us to work differently and actually live differently, and that applies here and for our clinical trials. Also, now our drug happens to be a weekly infusion, and so it's incredibly burdensome for families to take time off every week to go get an infusion. And first off, anyone suffering from a rare disease is absolutely devastating on the family structure, right? Obviously, for Duchenne, a child is going to be dying. They die every one child dies every day from Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and it is incredibly painful to watch your son deteriorate every day. And so it places such a strain on families. And so, many families often dip below the poverty line when having to face a disease like this. And so many of them can't afford to join a clinical study because it's just not feasible, right? They will lose their jobs. They will not be able to provide anything for their families. And so it's just not possible to do that. And so, with the advent of technology and being able to use this, and, from the way that we've been seeing COVID, is that we're actually being able to do things a lot more virtually. And therefore, you don't necessarily, you can bring the study to the patient rather than having the patient go to a clinic, which is obviously incredibly disruptive on the family. And so that's been an effort that we've been trying to do over the past 6 months, and we've made great strides using technology to be able to do that for patients and work in a more virtual environment, which we think is going to allow a much broader patient population to partake in our clinical studies.
Well, thank you, Ian, for that explanation. Thank you for sharing your story about your police story. I mean, after George Floyd, so many Black men shared their stories about dealing with the police, and I think a lot of us don't realize the fear that you live with, and so thank you for sharing that. I'm going to welcome back Jackie and Kent. One of my kids has just opened the door, so I'm going to close it. Even though I put this big Post-it, "Mommy on Zoom, do 2 to 3. I know they know how to read. So anyway, so I prepared a few more questions for Jackie and Kent and Ian, just want to remind people, if you want to ask questions, please use your Q&A function. I'm actually going to start with some audience questions. there were a bunch about the topic of setting diversity goals. And so I was wondering if you could talk about what kind of benchmarks your company has established. How do you measure success? Kent, maybe you could start us off what you guys do at Turner Construction.
Yeah, first and foremost, the transparency's got to be key. You got to tell everybody what you're going to track and share everything with them. One of the things that we do is we have one site where we put, anytime we do anything that we think is advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, it's on that tracker so that anybody can go to at any time. So you can see, June, July, August, they were full of stuff. September got a little bit slow. Like, what are you doing? And, hey, it's not as much. So you become very vulnerable by saying you get to see what we're doing all the time and challenging us. Of course, we measure, the people of color, but we're also measuring at different levels and positions. I'm sure everybody has heard that a lot. How long people stay within a position. So we have levels 1 through 8. How long does someone stay at a level 2? How long does someone stay at a level 3? We also, if you have someone that gets a solid performer, you get needs improvement, solid performer, high performer in our company. Someone gets a solid performer 2 years back to back. Why? Like, we knew they were a solid performer last year. Why didn't we do the coaching and development needed to get that person to a high performer? Makes the supervisor more responsible for the performance of the person themselves. I'll start with that. I think others probably want to jump in.
Sure, I'm happy to. We're really kicking this process off, so we haven't gotten to really well-defined metrics. I think we're trying to take somewhat of a different approach. We had Michael C. Bush come in from Great Places to Work and talk to our entire organization. And one of the things that's incredibly important is that we can set metrics, we can do whatever, but if there isn't a clear understanding of the benefit to the entire organization, then all the efforts to try to recruit people, if hiring managers aren't actually doing it, you're not going to make a dent on your actual metrics, right? And so getting people, spending some time up front right now, to get people educated, to understand the importance and the value that this will drive, we think is incredibly important in order to actually make this successful, right? I mean, we want, it's not necessarily just by the numbers. We want people to be inclusive. We want people to understand the value. And we think that getting doing work up front and getting this understanding will lead to that.
Jackie, where are you on companies actually setting metrics, setting numbers, X% women, X% people of color advance? Where are you on that?
I'm a little bit in the middle because I think it can create dysfunctional behavior. And as a immigrant woman of color, I always want to be hired for my expertise and what I bring to the table, and not because of my color. And so I think people, I like to call the middle of the day-to-day hiring manager and I have a supervisor, the frozen middle, because sometimes when you go into an organization, you get to the top level of the organization and the leadership like Kent and Ian, they understand where we're going, what we want to do. But somehow as we start to push it down, it doesn't get down to that middle manager. And so I'm a little bit ambivalent about what type of goals we set when we do goal setting. So I would have to really take a hard look at it. What I am more on I like to look at is really getting them to understand that culture, as the saying go, eat strategy for lunch. And so as Ken said, you can do all you want, and if the culture is horrible, nobody's going to stay and you're going to lose people. And so I always go into organization and let them understand that this diversity strategy that we're embarking upon, it's a journey. And so I think that, in light of the George Floyd killing, everyone is on the bandwagon to do something. And while that's good and well, I want to make sure I calm people down and tell them, let's take this as a journey. Look at this as a journey. And if you're looking at it as a journey, one of the first things I like to do, and Kent is doing it, and so is Ian, is going and build awareness around awareness and education. So the mid-level manager, the individual contributor, the people that are naysayer, the people that put the swatch sticker out there, and there's a lot of those people still in the organization that think nothing is wrong and why are we doing all of this, that they can understand why it's a business imperative, Shirley, and not a social nicety. And so I like to build the awareness, look at the culture, and then really make sure that there is a way that we continue to transform our strategy as we go along, and then come back and take a look and audit what we have done and see where it's sticking. So I like setting goals, but I'm very careful of, let's put X% because it's a journey. I came out of tech. And I always say to my boss, and he might be listening to this, is that, when you're in a company, a nano move is sometimes a big move, depending on how large the company is. And so people can get really frustrated if you're really like looking at the numbers. And that's all you're looking at. And, there's a lot of organizations out there, when you look at the top of the house, it's homogeneous. And how do we succession plan and have those leaders like Kent and Ian look at the top and say, okay, what are we going to do when some of these individuals roll off, and who is in the pipeline to take some of these roles coming up through the pipeline? So yes and no on the goal setting. You have to be intentional. Again, I know I'm overusing that word, and deliberate in your goal setting. And it can't be, oh, let's bring 5 more Black and brown people in here, and we're not looking to make sure we're setting them up for success.
We have a couple more good questions from the audience. How do we move into inclusion? How do we move into inclusion diversity without it feeling like affirmative action? Who wants to take that question?
Yeah, I think it builds off of what Jackie was saying. Look, as a Black person, I don't think there's anyone who wants to get a job because of their skin color. They want to get a job because of their skills, and so, that now different people will respond differently, in a particular environment. And so when you're thinking about inclusion, it is being intentional and to make sure that people are set up correctly so that they can flourish. If you just leave people to their own devices or allow them to be ostracized or alienated, that's an environment where they're not going to be successful, right? And so really creating an environment where people can be successful, so that's your concept of inclusion, of hearing people's thoughts, taking it into consideration, and making sure that people are comfortable and actually sharing their thoughts, and creating this diverse, ability to share these ideas. That is what's going to make people successful. And so, one of the things we're doing is in the process of actually, we have a multicultural group, but then also an African-American group also. And because there are different, different things at play, which are going to impact different races, and so it's been really nice, and people in the organization have expressed, the fact that they can go and be understood by their colleagues without having to explain something, and you can help them with problems that they're necessarily having with their manager or the like, and all of the experiences that we've all gone through, where you don't have to explain that, it's already as a given because we've all accepted it. That helps tremendously in being able to support employees in the organization. And so, and look, not all companies, we're now almost 1,000 people. So, we now have a decent amount of African Americans in the company. So that scale allows us to do something like that. But, other organizations that may not be possible, but being intentional to figure out what are the ways to make sure that people, when they are in the organization, are actually included is just incredibly important for their success.
So we have about less than 15 minutes left. So I'm going to go through these questions like a lightning round. So we have a question about what is D&I like in an organization that is predominantly white and smaller? So what do you do if that's your situation? Jackie, do you want to take that on?
I was gonna let Ken do it, but
Organization. That's not a Ken question. That's you.
What does D&I look like? You know, coming from technology, from a company that was large, but the majority was white male. You know, I would say D&I look like awareness. You start out with building awareness. Why? It's important. So you start building awareness, because someone told me years ago when I started in technology, Shirley, that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Meaning that, you know, there's pure white guys here and we're making our numbers. So why bother? Until that same individual came back when they went into a customer with a homogeneous group of salespeople, and the customer just happened to look like me and said, do you have anybody that looks like me in the organization? And then they realized that D&I in a small all-white company start out with awareness building and education around why you need to diversify your organization. Start with that. You know, education is something else. I always feel that when people know better, surely they do better. And so I won't get long-winded. I'll say it start with awareness and education building. And when they understand that now more than ever, as I like to say, and Shirley, I've said this to you, and I won't stop until I've said it. The title of this is, you know, talking about the culture in the era of the 4 Ps that I call, and you use this session, you have 2 of the P, the pandemic, the protests, prejudice, and politics. In this era that we find ourselves, organizations are not working with people who doesn't have a diverse group of people working for them. So if you go to sell into an organization or to partner with an organization and everyone looks the same, you're going to be called out on what are you doing to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization. And awareness and education will help you to understand how you're going to answer it and what you need to do. So back again to awareness and education. I'm going to beat that drum a lot because I think people, Kent and Ian, if people don't understand why it's so important and it's not just a social nicety, they'll continue to fight against it because they're going to say, you know what? Why do we need more people like Jackie here? You know, we're doing good without her. You're actually not. So I'll turn it back over to someone.
We'll be super pithy. I'll be super pithy. It looks like 2 things. It looks like an opportunity, a huge opportunity, and it looks like listening. If you are in a small organization, you have the ability to go and talk to every single one of your employees, right? So go and to reach out to those employees and listen. Do not bring preconceived notions of your views, listen to their views, and then figure out what you can do, you know, to help support them and potentially how to bring more people in. You know, it's fairly simple.
We had another question, really good question about how do you deal with D&I when you have a lot of hourly workers? You know, also, I don't know if it's the same answer, but a lot of people were like, we're working from home. How do you have these very sensitive, raw conversations about D&I on Zoom? Like how it's not the same as doing it in person. So can you address kind of, I don't know if someone wants to take hourly workers and then someone wants to take the working from home aspect. Kent, do you want to talk about, I mean, you probably had to do a lot of these, right? These, you know.
Yeah, we've been fairly effective with using Zoom for having these conversations. I don't think this is necessarily a barrier to having these deep conversations. Certainly, it brings the ability to bring in videos. If you want to do a quick clip, there's a video out there. Everybody who didn't grow up in a broken home, everybody who didn't have parents that had to work 3 jobs, you know, take a step forward, and then for some race, I think we've all seen it on TV, and then they say, okay, ready, go. And, you know, of course, all the white people are far ahead and the people of color are behind. And wow, the video can really bring a context into a conversation that wasn't necessarily available before. And as far as the hourly workers, I would say this, we our employees are salary, but a lot of the workers that work on our projects are hourly, and you got to make sure that people aren't just hourly getting jobs, and the diversity is there, but the skill sets and the training that you can do. The people of color should be the foreman, not just the numbers say we have a percentage wise. They should understand those unique tasks. If there's a downturn in the economy, maybe we're about to go through a little bit in the construction industry, are the more skilled positions that, although hourly, are the ones that hold on to their jobs longer. So it's not just about, do you have the numbers, are the skill sets there, and the leadership positions within those hourly positions.
All right, so we have 8 minutes left. I'm going to power through more questions. There were some more good questions from the audience. How do we keep the momentum going? There seems to be a lot of tension right now, given to D&I, and then, maybe we'll settle back into the norm. Like, how do you keep it going?
I think that you have to keep it top of mind. And usually when I go into any organizations, any one of the organizations I've worked with, I have really make it a point that I speak to the CEO, because I feel that if I don't have support in being there from the top of the house, then it's not going to stay. And I make sure everyone understand that this is not a check the box exercise and we're going to keep it going. And I think we just have to hold people accountable, both our day-to-day colleagues that we work with, but also leaders of the companies. I think this year has sort of opened up so many opportunity, and has also been a sad year in some case with all the people that have lost loved ones. But I think people are at a point now where they're willing and ready to listen. And I think that we just can't, I tell someone the other day, Shirley, that, I've been doing this for so long, and a CEO asked me what I've changed about me. And I think you might have asked me, and I'm just really unapologetic about speaking to this subject. And maybe I might hurt a few people's feelings along the way, but I will apologize and move on. But I'm not staying silent anymore. And I don't think if you're in an organization or working with an organization, I try not to sugarcoat if I'm talking to Ken or if I'm talking to Ian. I just say what needs to be done. And I remind people of what they signed up for.
Great. So I'm going to have 2 more questions, and then I'm going to hand it back to Bill. So how do you distinguish between true engagement and passivity when it comes to D&I?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, because, if people get cynical, you're going to fail, right? If you're not being authentic, if you don't really seem engaged, that's obvious. And so if you as a management team, aren't really supportive of it, don't do it. It's much better that you leave it alone than you make an effort which falls flat because you've just lost an entire, diverse workforce. Everyone will see that coming. And so really making sure that you are committed to doing it, and that means driving it throughout the entire organization. That means spending a significant amount of time and thinking and resources on it, and really ensuring that this comes to fruition.
Yeah, I would agree. The authenticity is key. You have to be able to deliver bad news to people just as much as you ever have. It doesn't mean you're not supporting them. And I'm just going to keep pounding be transparent. If you tell everybody what your plan is, now they got to hold you. Now they can hold you accountable to it. And then what the results were. And we actually added a diversity and inclusion officer to our group, and their number one mission is, constantly bring us back to, are we putting diversity, equity, and inclusion into every aspect of how we do business? And where we stray, call us to the mat.
So you guys have just spent almost an hour providing a lot of food for thought here on diversity and inclusion. So whether you have like 1,000 employees or 10, what is the one thing people can do today, whether it's individually or as a company, to kind of raise D&I to the next level?
I really do think it's talking about it. Like I said, the silver lining from George Floyd is that it forced a conversation that actually a lot of people were open to having, a conversation that Black employees and white employees, I think, benefited from equally. And so, continuing that conversation, having people being able to create a safe space where people can learn, people can share, will result in a better understanding of each other, which will ultimately just transcend into us. Look, this Black Lives Matter movement is based on one thing, which is just wanting to be protected like everyone else. Right? That's all it is. Let's be really clear. It is not that you have to live in fear. It is not that you're going to be treated differently. That's all people want, right? They want to be protected by the police in the same way others are protected by the police. And so, having that conversation, having it within organizations is going to lead to a better understanding of each other. And slowly we're going to continue to make progress, and we have already.
Shirley, just one thought, and this motivates me every day. I was told very early on by several people of color, yeah, I get it. This is going to become the new news cycle thing that everybody's going to want to jump in. We've all seen this play out before, and eventually you're going to go off and it's going to drop. Hey, we're just waiting. Well, I've said it 100 times. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. I like to
say,
say,
what about you, Jackie?
Be inclusive. It really encompasses everything that Ian said and Kent. I think inclusivity, being inclusive, and people use the terminology, this is a safe space, but I would like to offer up in closing that we should offer all of our employees, everyone from leadership to individual contributor, a brave space. Because when you say a safe space, you give the connotation that, oh, it might not be safe, so I'm going to tell you it's safe. But when a brave space is where, as Nelson Mandela like to say, and I love this quote, courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. So I like to offer a brave space that people can come in, and even though they might be a little skittish, they come in anyway and say. So inclusivity is the word of the day for me, and a brave space.
Thank you, Kent. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Ian. That is such a great way to end this. Thank you for the brave space that you've created. So I'm going to hand this back to Envision Bank CEO, Bill Parent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley, for leading this really important discussion. And I just want to express my appreciation to Jackie, to Ian, and to Kent for giving and sharing with us your insights, your perspectives, your stories. I think they're very powerful, and they'll be very helpful for all of us, including us at Envision Bank, as we continue on our journey for diversity and inclusion. So thank you very much. It's been fantastic. And I also like to thank the attendees for giving us some time today. And I think they found it very insightful. Congratulations, everybody.